Okay, we're back. I hope you have your new PowerPoints in front of you on various topics. There are also 2 other presentations, grief and loss and anxiety, but that's class 3, more likely. So I'll talk about those in the next recordings that I do later on this week and have them posted hopefully by next Tuesday for you. Anyway, we'll address these various topics. There are things called patterns of knowing. It's a nursing theory that you need to know what you know. And it helps us understand clients and the interactions that we have with them. The 4 patterns we do know are empirical, what we get from scientific data, best practices. Personal, we pull those in from life experiences. Ethical and aesthetic, we get those from morality of society at large and also the art of nursing. And therapeutic communication, any kind of communication is definitely an art form. So the 5th pattern of knowing is admitting what you don't know. And I think nurses in general don't like to do that. They like to be the one who knows a lot. And if you know it, you know it. If you don't, you should admit it and find a reason or find an answer for them somehow. But when you're thinking about that, I want you to think about mental illness and how we treat our mentally ill. We have some different therapies and modalities. You may be familiar with them or not. Psychoanalytical theory, and that was Freud. I said I'm not going to talk much about Freud. He had the whole id, ego, superego thing. I liked his defense mechanisms, his dream therapies. Those were really appropriate. Free association, that works quite well mainly because it tricks the brain into saying exactly what's on the brain instead of associating it with whatever's just been said. Developmental theory, we know all about Erikson. Erikson is linked also to Piaget. Piaget's for children, is Erikson for children. So that's a little bit different. Interpersonal therapy or theory, this is Sullivan. Sullivan believed in milieu therapy, which we have milieu therapy. The environment is a milieu where our patients are. It dealt with personality, relationships, different stages in the life cycle. It helps that the nurse or the social worker, whoever's running the group, is the silent observer, allowing the patient to talk. So in a lot of ways, Sullivan and Hildegard Peplau are very much alike. There's Peplau, the different roles of the nurse, beater, surrogate, counselor, everything to help the patient. There's lots of different theories that are out there. Humanist theory, and that's Rogers and Maslow, and you guys know who Maslow is. Rogers worked on this self-healing crap. The only things I really appreciate of his theory is the unconditional positive regard, the genuineness, and the understanding, empathy. I like those parts of him. Behavioral therapy, if you don't know Pavlov, he's the one with the dogs and the salivation. If you need clarification, I'll talk to you about it. Skinner, I studied him quite a bit in education. He is a behavioral modification expert, or he was. Positive, negative reinforcement. The kids who do really well get a pizza party. Those who don't lose recess, that kind of thing. And then Beck. Beck is the best. He is cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, I'll say that again. Beck is cognitive behavioral therapy. That means he links what you're thinking to the way that you act. And he said people act certain ways because they think certain ways. And then if we can change the way that they're thinking, we can change the way that they act. Very, very interesting idea. I like Beck. He's my favorite. So I probably will ask you a question or 2 about him. It'll be on the study guide. Existential therapy, rational emotive therapy. This is interesting too because It forces the person to stop their thought process. You walk into the bar, the girls are laughing. You automatically, oh my God, they're laughing at me. No, you stop and you say, oh, maybe they're not. Maybe they are, somebody just told a joke. So you have to stop your thinking, change your reaction to it. Okay? Frankl, he did something called logotherapy, which it's pretty much finding your place in the universe. I don't appreciate him at all. There's Pearls. I actually worked with a psychiatrist who practiced Gestalt therapy, and Gestalt therapy is very German. It's very, when I went in, I was sitting and I was talking with the patient for a bit, and I informed her the doctor would be in a moment. He wanted to discuss a few things with her, and she was comfortable with that. He came in, and he got about this far from her face, and he said, deal with it. That's pretty much Gestalt therapy. It's pretty much deal with it. So I don't like it very well. Glosser is reality. That is believing that people sabotage themselves. Maybe you, through negative thoughts, don't go after the job that you want. Well, I'll never get that job anyway. I might as well not do it. So you don't even apply. So you sabotaged yourselves. That's that theory, Glosser's theory, reality therapy. You see sometimes a man and a woman are getting divorced, and he says, well, what did, she's going on with her life and she's having a great time, and we're getting divorced, and I don't know why we're getting divorced. And the nurse says, what part did you play in this? That's reality therapy. It's like putting it up in your face. What did you do to cause this? Crisis and de-escalation. This is a very, very important topic for you guys to learn how to do. It not only deals with patients with mental illness, it deals with patients in all walks of nurse life. So, it actually can work with coworkers too. We're going to have somebody come and speak to us about this on HPS Day, December 4th, I think. It's the first Monday in December. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of this. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. Excuse me. A lot of detail, but we'll talk about it. We have to define crisis. So crisis is an emotionally significant event or radical change in the person's life. It's unstable or state of affairs where a decisive change is impending, one that has a possibility of highly undesirable outcomes. Crisis has a profound impact on people with mental and emotional problems, and those are more likely to experience a cascade of events leading to a sympathetic response. Okay? That being said, do you know what a crisis is? You put off studying for an exam. Every day you put off studying. You don't study at all. The night before the exam, you try and cram in 6 weeks. You're in crisis. You're going to have a sympathetic response. The mentally ill would have a sympathetic response. Mentally healthy, maybe not. Sympathetic, fight or flight. It's actually fight, flight, or freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze is due to a traumatic event. An enormous amount of energy is released by our neuroendocrine system. I'm not going to read this to you. You guys know what flight or flight is. Fight, flight, or freeze. Freeze is where you are so overwhelmed with all the epinephrine and norepinephrine going on in your system that you are locked up. Your muscles are literally locked up. You cannot move. You are frozen. Okay? You hold your breath usually. Yeah. I remember car accident. Went around a corner, caught some black ice, fishtailed, tried to control it, and then I couldn't move. Hands white-knuckled on the wheel as I went underneath the fence and hit a tree. Couldn't move. That's freezing. Okay? Think back to a time of extreme stress for you. Did you run? Did you stand your ground? or did you just freeze? Okay. There are 4 stages of situation and crisis: prodromal, the crisis outbreak, the chronic, or the resolution. Now, prodromal, this is the patient that we're taking care of, and his family member is getting a little upset. They're saying things that lead us to believe that we're going to have to call a code violet soon. Okay? We can diffuse it there by addressing this other person and seeing exactly how we can meet their need. We can diffuse it there. If you don't diffuse it there, it's going to escalate until they have a big event. This is where they're screaming and yelling, and I want to talk to the patient's doctor, and I want to talk to the hospital administrator, and I want to talk to blah, blah, blah. And you call the code violet. Okay? Chronic lingering effects, sometimes even after they have been assisted, even after they have been talked to, there is still residual anger, still residual issues that they're not going to completely disregard. And that's hard because it can lead to another crisis right away. You have to really diffuse it. It's better to just deal with it in the prodromal stage, suck it up and say, okay, I'm scared, and this person is very angry, and they're scaring me, and I don't know what to do, but I better deal with it now. It's better to do it now than it is later. So, crisis response depends on the person. Okay, so you need to know if there is going to be a response, and that is anticipation. Anticipation is where you observe people and you make mental note of their behaviors, and you watch consistency and you watch escalation of their behaviors. This is the patient that we had not too long ago, maybe 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, who they do 50-minute checks up at St. Rita's, and she had disappeared, and we were looking for her. Found her. I had watched her all day. She was manic, and her speech was more pressured. Her speed around the unit was increasing. She was increasingly involving herself in other conversations. She was becoming more and more disagreeable, and it was just getting to a point. I told the clinical manager, I said, she's going to have a crisis. We're going to have to deal with this crisis. She was refusing her meds, I remember that, and she disappeared. And it's a locked unit, so she was there somewhere. We just had to find her. They found her. She had gotten into one of the locked pantries and had pushed the refrigerator over to the door to guard it, to block it, while she took plastic silverware, flatware, and was cutting herself. Of course, she was completely undressed, taking off all her clothes, and singing. Don't remember what she was singing. She was singing. At that point, it's too late to intervene. It was just medication seclusion, she's done. If we had addressed the escalation, if we had anticipated the crisis appropriately, we probably could have offset this crisis. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. Maybe this is common. We're only there 1 day a week. Maybe this is common for this patient. I don't ask if it happens every day. I just know whether or not I should take them. But if we had anticipated, it would make you think that we could have prevented possible cutting injuries, possible need for injection, possible need for seclusion. Events that can lead to a crisis: life events, financial problems, loss of a loved one, loss of housing, loss of a pet, a promotion. The good stuff can cause stress too. And lots of times people don't realize that if you have too many good things going on, it's a need for your time that's causing the crisis that you're experiencing. Internal events that can cause crisis: hallucinations and delusions, paranoia. Everybody's out to get me. They want to hurt me. I see the government coming. They're right over there. I believe that I am a victim of my circumstances kind of thing, can cause a crisis. I'm sure you can see how that could happen. Depression and anxiety, drug and alcohol use, physical injury and illness. Too much illness, they're too sick for too long, makes people mad, which is why oncology nursing for some people is a really good fit, and for others it's not. Okay. And then personal stressors and how well they cope with the personal stressors is important. Individual variables that influence a crisis: coping. How well do you cope? Availability and accessibility of resources. Even if you don't cope very well, do you have somebody you can call, somebody you can talk to, somebody you can vent with? Your mental status, obviously, how well you can control your impulses. I'm really bad with chocolate. That kind of impulse is okay, not so much for my health, but I'm not going to go out and shoot somebody if I don't get chocolate. Kind of think along those lines. And past experiences and what you did that made it work. So if you've had a death, how did you cope with a death in the past that made it work for you? Organizational standard. Usually the facility where you are has some sort of protocol in place. Like I know at St. Rita's, like most hospitals, you'll call a code violet, which is a violent person. They have some sort of plan, a response team, a contact person, and then completing the documentation. So if we had a code violet for this woman who had locked herself in the room, we called the code violet. 3 security officers came up. They assisted the nurse in restraining the patient to receive a PRN Giadon. They also assisted in soft restraints and transportation back to the seclusion room where another nurse sat with her, and that was the response team for psych. But different places in the hospital might have a different mix of a response team who would come to try and diffuse the situation. What are the best tools in dealing with a crisis? Everybody's safe. That's first and foremost. If you have a highly volatile person and they are threatening and they are gesturing with their hands and their arms, it's time to get out of the way and call security. If you have somebody who is just yelling and screaming and angry, be assertive and be very clear. Okay, clear communication. Active listening and compassion. Nobody wants to have a fit. Okay, nobody wants to have a crisis. Nobody wants to make your life inconvenient. Nobody wants to do that. They just are reacting to a situation, and you need to react in the most professional and courteous way possible. Okay. We want to anticipate a crisis outbreak. Do not let yourself be cornered. Be observant of exits. Give yourself plenty of individual space. Don't stare. I tell people this all the time. If you go into a situation and your gut tells you that you're not safe, get out of the situation. It's that simple. Okay? Try to remain calm, self-assured, be empathetic. Let them know you're listening to them, you hear them. In fact, you may want to say that as they're yelling at you. You say, I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. How can I help you? Okay. Clear communication, unconditional positive regard. They may be screaming at you and they may be hating all over you, but you accept them for being human and you go ahead and you accept them for who they are and you move on with it. You give back to them. They're screaming and yelling. You give back to them calm behaviors, calm voice, low tones, not so much excessive gestures. Something that is going to help them relax. Have them mirror you. And people who are in crisis will mirror calm behaviors. If you got it together, pretty soon they're going to pull it together just by mirroring your interaction with them. Reduce stimulation. So if it's something that they're angry about right then and there, take them someplace else. Okay. Focus on the issue, personal preference, and work with them to get control. Eye contact, professional posture, no big gestures. somebody who's in crisis is going to go for your nonverbals way before your verbals. You hear it all the time, Judge Judy. He drew back like he was going to hit me. Not necessarily. Maybe he's just putting his arm behind his back. Okay? People misinterpret all the time when they're in a crisis. So you need to realize that and move with that. Do not take the patient crisis language as a personal attack. They can call you every blank beep, zip, bup, 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 whatever in the world. And you're still going to smile and be positive with them and accept them. It's okay. Lots of them won't even apologize afterward. They're going to be so completely embarrassed at what they did. It's okay. Right? Preserve the individual's dignity. That's a big one. Like I said, they're going to be embarrassed. So, if they say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call you I'm not going to say the words, but all those things. Say, it's okay. You were just upset." And move on. Okay? And you're not allowed to do that back to them. If they're calling you all sorts of names, you can't call them names back. That's not professional. Okay? Be respectful when setting limits or calling for support, and be aware that the person's very sensitive. They're like just a raw nerve, usually when they're in crisis. Thou shalt not. You will not threaten your patients or their families. You will not argue with them. You will not contradict them, challenge them, give them an order, or say, if you don't do as I say, I'm not going to take care of you. No, you won't do that. After a crisis, you need to talk to somebody, okay? Because you can only smile and be nice and accept all this garbage that's being dumped on you for the time it takes to de-escalate the situation. After that, you're either going to go run outside and scream, or you're going to be pounding on your locker. You got to go talk to somebody. Debriefings are very important for them to share your garbage, to share your load, and to help you deal and cope with what you're feeling. Okay? Beyond that, we'll talk about treatment modalities. Outpatient treatment is best for acute problems. We have individual psychotherapy. They have some of that. Group therapy, open or closed, family therapy, family to family, which is through NAMI. And all the support groups are out there. You're going to be going to a support group. So, other therapies, mind-body therapy is herbal therapy. Some people say that, what makes you happy? St. John's wort makes you happy, but you got to take something like 6 pills 6 times a day. It's crazy. Some people believe in chiropractic for increasing mood. Some people feel that anger and irritability is because of clogs in their energy fields, and they just need to get their energy fields brushed out. Back in my 20s, I learned how to do that. It was fun. I'll probably do it in class to somebody. So, treatment modalities, rehab, psych rehab. They got all sorts of rehab that has community support services, allows people to look for jobs. It helps people when to call for help. Inpatient stays. Inpatient stays are for the acute person who's having an exacerbation. You have somebody who has cut their wrists. They need to be inpatient, not outpatient. Okay? Very short stay. You'll find when we talk about law, it's about 3 days. Case management's involved with that. Sometimes there is partial hospitalization programs where they come during the day, they have classes, they go home in the evening. Some people think those work. Mercy Hall at St. Rita's used to be like that. They don't have that anymore up there. They do have some partial hospitalization, but it's not related to alcoholism. Treatment settings, group homes. Coleman has several group homes around the Lima area. Supervised apartment buildings, assisted living, foster daycare, adult daycare, and respite or crisis housing, which is what Coleman is a crisis house. And it's a place where they can go and get acute treatment. Psychiatric rehab, there's a couple of different different rehab models. The clubhouse is the one I like the best. It's kind of like a dorm for the mentally ill. They group living, they maintain all parts of the house, like this person cleans, this person does the dishes, this person grocery shops, this person does whatnot. It works. It really does work. Different populations. The homeless usually spend more time in jail, spend more time in shelters, have less family contact, and face greater barriers to employment. We do have PATH and we have ACCESS. And in the basement of Coleman, they spoke to ACCESS being an outreach and intensive case management. They come in sometimes daily, they receive therapies, they receive their medication, and it helps them if they're in crisis. They're easily identified and put straight into the CSU. Prisoners, we have some mentally ill prisoners out there, about 13% of them, and it's usually because of some sort of exacerbation that they ended up there. We all know that comes from the deinstitutionalization, but sometimes it can come from the policies of the police and the society, which is kind of really interesting that I'm just thinking of this now. Coleman has a nurse who works there who does ride-alongs every day with the police and the fire department. That would be the coolest, baddest job in the world. Going out in the community, dealing with these people, keeping them off drugs or helping them get off drugs, finding them in crisis. Lima really has grown in our understanding of the mentally ill and the need that's there for treatment. Some of your bigger cities, if you're not clearly explaining things to the powers that be, they may not be as accepting. Prisoners, what kind of trouble does it take to get them back into society? Violence. Oftentimes they're victims themselves of rape. They might self-harm. They might still use. They might not have anybody and end up on the streets. So what can we do for them? There needs to be better transition programs. There's another job for you, ladies and gentlemen. Transition programs for prisoners who are mentally unhealthy back into society at large. Interdisciplinary care. For psychiatric care is interdisciplinary. We usually have a pharmacist. Micah is a pharmacist that we have at Coleman. We have psychiatrists on board, psychologists, psychiatric nurses, that's us. Social workers, you will learn to love your social worker. Occupational therapy, recreational therapy, that is the coolest job too. You play games all day with your patients. Play games, Risk, Pictionary, lots of fun. And then we have individual vocational rehab specialists, so people who can work can get jobs. It takes a lot to get a mental health assessment. We do it in clinical. You don't know you're doing it in clinical, but you're doing it. You are trying to get your patient to participate and talk with you about their health. It depends on their ability to understand what you want and your approach. Most people are uncomfortable the first day, and that's okay, guys. It's fine. I expect by the end, all of you will be very comfortable in talking to anybody about anything they want to discuss, and you'll have an unconditional positive attitude response. The actual interview with the patient needs to be done in private. They need to be safe. If the patient wants their family there, that's acceptable. Otherwise, no. You'll want to use open-ended questions. Then you want to use focus questions if they're not quite understanding what you're saying, and very non-judgmental, unconditional positive regard. You're going to gather data on their history, their general appearance, their mood and affect, and there are terms you need to learn. A blunt affect and a broad or flat affect are very similar. If you look at the difference, one's little or slow response, and the other one is none. Okay. Broad affect is really emotional, all over their face. They go all from happy to sad. Inappropriate affect This is somebody who's smiling and they're saying, yeah, I'm going to kill you. That's inappropriate affect. Restricted affect is where they're very serious, they're very restrictive in what they're trying to hide from you and show to you. Based on what they're saying. Okay, they're very serious. Other data. Any kind of abnormality in sensory experiences or misperceptions. So you're going to judge their concentration. You're going to judge their abstract thinking. Abstract thinking is kind of like those old Benjamin Franklin statements. A stitch in time saves 9. A rolling stone gathers no moss. Those kind of things. What does that mean to you? And have them explain it to you. Concentration, have them count from 100 backwards by 7s. That really takes some concentration. Judgment, you want to ask them, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you have a flat tire in downtown Lima. How are you going to get home? Okay. Self-concept, have them describe themselves to you, good and bad. What their current role is in their support systems. How well they eat and sleep, medications, ability to perform independent ADLs. Can they get up? Can they shower? Can they brush their teeth? Can they do it all by themselves? Do they need help doing that? And then we're going to assess circumstantial thinking. Circumstantial thinking is kind of fun. It reminds me of myself. You get on one topic and then you go all the way around the world and you come back to the same topic at the end. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's actually, I'm not really that bad, but in mental illness, they'll talk about everything from world peace to hell. So it's really a broad encompassing. Delusion is a false belief. Flight of ideas and loose associations are going to be the most confusing for you guys to assess. Flight of ideas are ideas that are all linked together and they all make sense. So, I want to go skydiving. I like the tiger. I think he's beautiful. Can you tell me what the butterfly does? Okay, it's all linked together. Loose associations are very difficult to understand. No, I don't want to go on the picnic. I'm not an elephant hunter. No tiger teeth for me. Okay, you can see how one has very distinct all-encompassing thoughts that are just linked together, and the other one makes no sense at all. Okay, loose associations make no sense at all. Ideas of reference is kind of cool. They believe the person, usually in media, TV or on the newspaper, is talking about them. Okay, tangential thinking. That's where they go way off topic and they really never come back. So they're real tangential. Thought blocking is where they just kind of and they never go back. So completely lose their thought and lose their physical ability to give it to you. Okay, the thought processes. You need to assess thought processes. So thought broadcasting is one thing, is that other people can hear or say what they're thinking. Thought insertion is that other ideas from another person are being put there by someone else. Thought withdrawal is that somebody is taking the power or the knowledge out of their brain, sucking it out of their brain. And then word salad is just a bunch of words that are thrown together that mean nothing. Camera, toe, light, jumping. That's word salad. And that's really disorganized schizophrenia before catatonia. Suicide. You want to assess, do they have a plan? Now, we have a duty to warn also if they have homicidal. And I'll tell you a story. I had a patient. He was a very sweet guy, in the beginning. He was a very nice guy in the beginning. Very polite, yes ma'am, no ma'am. Sat across from the table area where we were sitting. He sat across from me, answered questions, and I came to the part, I said, I see that you're here for probation, and I also see that you have no drug addictions. Can you tell me more about that? Yeah, I said, can you? And he said, yeah, I can tell you more about that. And I said, okay, well then tell me. And he said, well, I was molested as a child, so I molested by my brother, so I molested my brother's child. Oh, okay. And then he says, yeah, he says, and now, I realize that it's not really their fault and I shouldn't have done that, and I'm going to go kill my mom because she molested me, in addition to my brother. I see. Okay. And do you have a plan for killing your mom? He goes, yeah, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go shoot her in the head. Okay. I understand what you're saying. I believe group is starting now. We'll have you go to group. Okay. He goes to group. I go to the clinical manager. I said, we need to call somebody because his mom's in danger. When he gets out and goes home in 20 days, he's going to kill her. That's what he says. She says, okay, I'll do it. I said, okay. So I go on about my business. I see a clinical manager. I look for him. Because we weren't quite done with our assessment. He had group to go to, and I can't find him. And I asked the person running the group, I said, where'd he go? He left. He was voluntary. He left. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, he left. I'm like, so I run back to clinical manager, and I said, he's gone. Did you call his mom? No, I forgot. It's called a duty to warn. If you know of a plan that they're going to kill somebody, you need to call that person. We ended up calling his mother and also calling the police, and they went to mother's home. He never arrived back home. So they didn't find him for at least 2 weeks. He had been living in this other home somewhere, hiding from the police because he was probated there, and not voluntary, by the way. That person got in trouble for that. But yeah, you have a duty to warn, and that's what it's called. It's a duty to warn. I should have called the mother myself. I didn't. I relied on somebody else to do that. Don't do that. Okay? More data gathering. Sensorium and intellectual processes. Recent and remote memory. For someone with Alzheimer's, remote memory is probably going to be fine. Recent memory may be a problem. You want to ask the correct question, however. You don't want to ask, what did you have for breakfast this morning, if you weren't there to see what they ate. If you ask me what I had for breakfast, I'm going to tell you I had biscuits and gravy and eggs and grits and toast, and it was awesome. Now, in my mind, that's what I wanted to eat, okay? What did I really have? A Pop-Tart and some orange juice. Okay, so unless you were physically there to verify that that is what they ate, you cannot believe that that is what they ate. Okay? So not a good question to ask. Orientation, person, place, and time. Ability to concentrate, spelling the word backwards, serial sevens, 3-part task. Take the pencil, walk to the desk, put the pencil down. Okay? Abstract interpretation, we've talked about this already. More data. Are they having hallucinations? And furthermore, are these hallucinations telling them to do things? Command hallucinations are very dangerous. If they're saying, kill your mother, that's a command hallucination. That's bad news. If they're just whispering in the background and you can't make out what they're saying, it's still a hallucination, but it's not a command hallucination. It's not as dangerous. We want to assess for judgment. How can they adapt to a situation? Insight. If somebody tells you, I make really bad decisions, guess what? That's good insight, especially if they do make really bad decisions. If somebody says to you, there's nothing wrong with me, but they shoot up heroin every other day, there's something wrong with them, okay? And we got to figure out what they like about themselves and what they don't, and how they plan to fix what they don't like, if they can, by helping them develop coping strategies. Okay? We have to look at their roles in relationships, eating and drinking, barriers to compliance. Do they not have a car? Can they not get to the pharmacy to get their medications because they can't afford it? What are those barriers that are keeping them from being healthy? Okay. Legal and ethical issues. We don't have too much more to go. Making good time. Legal and ethical issues. We'll talk a little bit about this. Involuntary hospitalization, this is an EMC, emergency medical commitment. It happens at St. Rita's. It happens at most inpatient facilities. It is because they are a harm to themselves or other. They depends on the situation, where they're at, which state they're in, and they can be kept up to 72 hours. Now, the trick that most people have learned over the years is that they can come in on an EMC. Say they try to kill themselves. They come in on an EMC and they say, after 24 hours, oh, you know what? I was so beside myself. I'm fine. Please let me sign as a voluntary admission. And you say, oh, well, wonderful. I'm glad you plan on staying here. And you give them the voluntary admission papers and they sign it. Guess what? They can leave now. If for an involuntary admission, they're stuck for 48 to 72 hours, up to 3 days. If they are a voluntary, they can leave whenever they want. Okay? Let's see. They have to sign a written request, and it's going to be AMA. And if they are violent, or if they're really not going to go out and they're going to go out and hurt somebody, the doctor can actually say, yeah, you're not going anywhere. We're keeping you here. Sorry. People who have pervasive mental illness or have had trouble with law enforcement, usually they're mandated. So those are my probate people. They come in because they're driving too quickly, or they got drug charges, or they have schizophrenia and it's not controlled well, and that's when they end up. And frequently, if they're really ill, we're going to get them a guardian or a conservator to help take care of them and their finances and their situations. And that depends. Like a lawyer who takes over for someone, or a doctor who takes over for someone, they're going to go non-financial, so it's going to be more of a conservatorship with the monies legislated out by the courts or doled out by the court systems. Legal considerations, seclusion, 1-to-1 for the first hour, then you can do it on a video. So with this lady who had her little crisis and we put her in seclusion, she was in there with the nurse for about an hour, and then she went to sleep with the GIA on and kicked in. Restraints, you can take them off, you can take them on. You have to have orders for them within 1 hour and every 8 hours after, and then every 4 hours. And the nurse has to look at them every couple hours. For a child, it's much less time. It's got to be renewed every 2 hours. And if they're in seclusion for too long, they need to be debriefed, okay, to understand why they were in seclusion for so long. HIPAA, you guys know HIPAA. I've already talked about duty to warn. The insanity defense is not real. You hear about it all the time. Oh, it's because they were out of their mind when they did it. It's not real. You have to meet the criteria for McNaughton's rule for it to even be considered a possible defense, is that you were mentally incapacitated. So nobody's really insane. They're mentally incapacitated. Person cannot be found guilty because they cannot control their actions or understand the wrongfulness of their act. That's the McNaughton rule. Your liability must meet the standards of care. Now, you have a patient and they're in restraints, and you do everything by the book. Restraints off every 2 hours, do cert checks, restraints back on. They're in restraints 6 hours. Patient leaves a couple days later under much better control, suddenly starts having complaints of numbness and tingling in their fingers. Are you responsible? You could be. Numbness and tingling is a non-tangible thing. It's considered something the patient says it is. Your only defense against things like that is accurate and thorough documentation. Don't forget, documentation is your friend, okay? Torts, that's a medical or a legal term for, there's intentional and there's unintentional. Unintentional torts is failing to do what a reasonable and prudent person would do in similar circumstances. Malpractice is an unintentional tort. Negligence is an unintentional tort. If we're going to get in trouble with those things, It's because we didn't follow procedure. For some silly reason, we didn't do the 15-minute checks and we lost the patient. Or, we were supposed to check for landmarks before we gave an injection, and we didn't check for landmarks, and we gave it into the sciatic nerve. That's malpractice. Okay, you're liable for that. It's an unintentional tort. Doesn't mean that you had any intent in doing it. It was an accident, but you're still going to get sued. Okay, so better know your business when you go do stuff like that. Intentional torts: assault, battery, false imprisonment, and that has to be proved that the nurse did it intentionally and deliberately. You know, assault is where you just yell at them, and battery is where you actually hit them. Okay. False imprisonment's the one you're going to see in psych probably more often. They put me in seclusion. They left me there all day. Documentation, documentation, documentation. Okay. Other ethical issues. Some terms: utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number, genealogical, based on actions as moral without regard. Guiding principles of that is autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, justice, veracity, and fidelity, and that all falls into your scope of nursing practice. If you've never read it, go to the OBN website, read Scope of Nursing Practice. Okay. Some of the things that people struggle with is the client rights to self-determination versus public good in mental health. Does the patient have the right to refuse their medication? If they're schizophrenic and they see things and hear things and are violent, do they have the right to refuse their medication? Yeah, they do. Everybody has the right to refuse. Everybody, regardless. You have a patient, like I said, that woman who kind of had the crisis there, she had refused her meds all day. You can't make them take them. So what are you going to do? Some of the other therapies that are out there that we can do somatic therapies, and that would be light therapy. A non-somatic would be ECT. Bio-spiritual therapy, psychoanalysis. There's Beck with his behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is Beck, and then interpersonal theory. Psychobiology. This is where I come in and I tell you most of your psych issues are neurotransmitters. Okay? In a nutshell, that's what it is. They give you an organic cause. They tell you what you can treat it with. They tell you the prognosis. If treated appropriately. There's pieces of the brain, pieces and parts of the brain, and it tells you the different things that are influenced by different disease processes. The neurotransmitters are very important, and psychotropic medications, especially the second generation antipsychotics that are coming down the line, are just fabulous. They're in so much control. Now, interestingly, when you go to do your medical research or medicine research, it'll say it is thought to do this. You can't measure neurotransmitters in the brain. Okay, we can't do that yet. So we are basing the efficacy of the medication on the relief of the symptoms. Are you with me here? That's what's got in my brain that it really is a neurochemical imbalance, because if this drug fixes it, then that's what the problem was. Okay. Maybe I'm too literal, I don't know. We have neurotransmitters that are excitatory or inhibitory. Our excitatory ones are dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and glutamate, and those actually, schizophrenia. They deal a lot with schizophrenia, those guys. Inhibitory, serotonin, GABA, those are the ones mainly for depression and mania. And then you get into acetylcholine and histamine, which could be either. It just depends. Then I have a lovely picture of the synapse with the dendrite and the axon and the receptor sites. And I love to draw this on the board, so I'm not going to go into great detail on this. But just know that some of your medications work by, number one, propagating more receptor sites. Number two, not allowing reuptake of the neurotransmitter once it's in the synapse, allowing it to linger there and fit into receptor sites once they've been exhausted by previous pocketing of neurotransmitters. It'll make sense. Yeah, when you read it, it'll make a little more sense, I think, if you didn't understand that. Other causes, some are genetic. This slide's kind of dated. They're using twin studies, psychoimmunology. They look at infections. They think, and maybe this is what's caused schizophrenia, and this is what causes schizophrenia. They've actually found a genetic code for schizophrenia. So it really is not all genetic, but the bulk of it, I would say, is genetic with a trigger somewhere along the line. We do PET scans, SPECT scans, and we actually see different uptake and higher areas of activity and glucose, radiation, and it can, if you look down and you can see the schizophrenic twin and the unaffected twin, you can see the differences in the uptake in the frontal lobe there with the schizophrenic twin, and then you have discordant monozygotic twins, and you can see the differences there in the frontal lobe with the schizophrenic. The PET scan with OCD, you see the greater activity in the frontal lobe in the OCD brain, the increased activity. And then for depression, you see the depressed brain versus the undepressed brain. And you can see, well, on the slides this is blue, so it gives a whole new concept of being blue, but it's much darker in the depressed brain than it is in the normal brain. All right, so there are the first two classes, and hopefully I'll figure out a way to make this a little more interesting for you the next time. I'll really try. I might bring a whiteboard or something down with me and draw pictures and whatnot. We'll just have to wait and see. Until then, enjoy your evening. I'll see you next week.